Today's video is written by Guy.
But yeah, it's me again this time, sorry about that. But hey, you're here, so watch the video anyway, and if it's really bad, you can just leave a comment saying it was terrible, but at least you'll have watched it all the way through. That's it. Kisses.
I've already handled a bunch of UFO cases, and almost every time I get the same kind of comments. I'm just a non-believer. Almost a heretic. Still, it's not my fault if, when you dig a little deeper, all the cases turn out to be hoaxes, misidentifications, or stories completely made up to gain notoriety or make some money. But don't get me wrong, like I said, that's exactly what I'm waiting for. To finally have proof of extraterrestrial existence. Maybe I was just unlucky, picked the wrong cases, or who knows. The ones with the most questionable evidence, like for example a post hole in a field near Valence, a bacteria, insurance scam for American cows, 3 buddies messing with the rich in Sergi, the Brazilian BDSM defecators, crop circles overflowing with bovies. Anyway, you get the idea. Check out my playlist, there's lots to watch. So I keep searching for the ultimate proof that aliens are dropping by to say hi. So here's a really famous case where there's a real, truly authentic UFO that lots of people saw, and there are even photos, and this time we're really going to see something, and I won't be so smug after this. So let's take a time machine and go back to the early 1940s under the California sun. Venice Beach, Santa Monica, Malibu, legendary places where you can admire the sunset over the ocean. Grab your beach towels and a sweater to keep you warm. Here we are in Los Angeles on the night of February 24th to 25th, 1942. It's time to look at the biggest wild goose chase in history, or how to fire 1,440 shells into the sky without ever hitting anything except the neighbors' roofs. If you know a bit about modern history, you know that the first half of the 1940s was anything but calm. Well, in Europe that's obvious since 1939, but the United States still thinks they're safe in their own corner. Having nearly a whole continent to yourself definitely helps. Well, a continent, yes, but not just that. There are also a few islands like the Hawaiian archipelago, a territory that was annexed, but not yet the 50th state of Uncle Sam. However, there is a naval base there that you surely know, Pearl Harbor. Since we're here, I'll finish the historical overview. Because at the time, Japan was expansionist and didn't really appreciate having its plans hindered by US economic sanctions. That made Emperor Hirohito grumpy. Also, the Emperor's generals have an issue with Pearl Harbor. It's a big military base that could serve as a bridgehead for America if, in addition to economic sanctions, they decided to come and support the coveted territories. The Japanese command therefore comes to this conclusion: no more naval base, no more fleet. No more fleet, no more problems. No more problems. No more problems. A plan is then devised to destroy the American outpost and force its ships to retreat to the distant California coast. And so, on the morning of December 7, 1941, the Japanese attack is launched on Pearl Harbor by 6 aircraft carriers, 9 destroyers, battleships, cruisers, and nearly 450 fighters and bombers. American losses are very heavy, with a human toll of 3,600 wounded and killed, not counting the material damage. The United States did not expect this attack, which explains the losses. But that's not all. General Walter Short, who was in charge of the base command, for example, did not believe in the effectiveness of radar. It was a recent invention, barely operational and not very accurate. It was Sunday, no flights were scheduled, so the surveillance team wasn't replaced that day. General Marshall also chose the telegraph over the telephone, which delayed information transmission. In the following months, investigation commissions revealed and publicized other command errors, negligence, and overconfidence. But let's move on. The Japanese dealt a severe blow, and the Americans, who entered the war, took it badly. Well, now you know why cities on the west coast of the USA, like Los Angeles, had mobile anti-aircraft batteries and powerful searchlights in 1942. There are also citizen patrols tasked with helping the residents. The fear of a new air attack, announced as possible by the press and the government after the one at Pearl Harbor, is very real. And rightly so, since 3 months after that humiliation, on February 23, 1942, the submarine I-17 attacked an aviation fuel depot in Santa Barbara, less than 200 kilometers from the City of Angels. There was little material damage, but it again put significant pressure on civilians and military authorities. The Japanese struck directly on American soil without being detected or triggering a counterattack. But while this event increases the tension between the two sides, the arrival of a third belligerent will change the situation. Here we are on the night following the submarine attack, February 24th, with civilians and military personnel on edge. At 7:18 p.m, the residents are informed by radio of a first alert, yellow, which means an intermediate level. Flashing lights of unknown origin are reported near the defense installations. All anti-aircraft batteries are on high alert, scanning the sky and the sea for enemy aircraft. However, the radars detect nothing. Night had already fallen hours earlier. The sky is clear, and since nothing indicates a possible threat, the alert is lifted at 22:23. The residents, reassured and some thinking it was just a simple drill, finish their evening and fall asleep. A few hours pass. Shortly after midnight, the radars pick up an echo 190 kilometers to the west off the coast. An unidentified object is coming from the ocean, which means two things. It's neither an American aircraft nor a civilian plane. So it's very likely a Japanese plane, and it could be the beginning of a bombing raid on civilians. It may seem odd that there's only one echo for an attack, but perhaps one aircraft flew too high by mistake while the others stayed below the detection threshold of American defenses. The observation posts relay the information, and on February 25th at 2:15 in the morning, the anti-aircraft batteries in Los Angeles are placed on green alert. Everything is ready to fire. The radar echo indicates that the target is now only a few kilometers from the coast and its 200,000 inhabitants. That being said, the weather is favorable for the American forces because the advantage of the winter night for the soldiers on watch is the calm that prevails. The Japanese aircraft will be heard from afar, so the gunners listen for the drone of the enemy squadron. However, the ground cannons remain insufficient against an air raid. So, in addition to the defense batteries and the spotlights ready to be turned on, the Air Force has, at its nearby Edwards base, fighters ready to take off as soon as the direction of the Japanese fighters is known. Everyone is holding their breath. At 2:21 a.m., a blackout is ordered from south of San Francisco to the Mexican border. That is, across over 900 kilometers of coastline. Tension increases as the radars suddenly go silent. No more objects are being detected, and still no sound of an engine in the air. Meanwhile, the information centers are starting to receive calls from residents who claim to have seen lights, enemy planes, or bright objects in the sky. Contradictory reports from civilians who have been told for months that an attack is coming and who are panicking, woken up in the middle of the night by warning sirens, maybe. Or maybe something is lurking in the sky, biding its time. But the soldiers on duty still see and hear nothing. At 2:43, aircraft are reported over Long Beach, which borders the port of Los Angeles. An artillery colonel confirms the presence of a V-shaped formation of 25 silver aircraft at more than 3 kilometers altitude, but he cannot identify them. At 3:06, the first explosions are heard. The Army's 37th Coastal Artillery Brigade has just opened fire. First with 4 guns, then within seconds with all available batteries spread along the coast and throughout the city. The dark winter sky then turns into a deluge of fire. The warning sirens sound again and the searchlights sweep across the sky. In the city, random power outages gradually deprive the residents of light, while the 12,000 civilian volunteers gear up and stand ready to assist the population. Terrified by the deafening noise of gunfire and explosions, the residents of Los Angeles look up at the sky and witness a sight that will stay with them for the rest of their lives. Tens of thousands of witnesses, including journalists, see a huge, almost motionless, shining object suspended in the sky, lit by powerful spotlights on the ground and the flashes from exploding shells. The object was huge, simply huge, and practically right above my house. It floated in the sky, a beautiful pale orange, probably the most beautiful thing anyone had seen. I could see it perfectly because it was so close, said Kathy, a witness to the events. immediately alerted the fighters from Edwards Air Force Base located about 50 kilometers away and on alert until then, took off urgently with orders to intercept the intruder and protect the city. They sent the fighter jets. I saw them approach in a group, then turn around. They were shooting at it, but it didn't seem to matter, Kathy added. Quoted by newspapers such as the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner and the Los Angeles Times, witnesses estimated that there were more than 50 luminous objects flying in formation or individually. Some sources even mention 100 objects moving close to the ground and up to 6 kilometers in altitude, some almost stationary while others exceeded 300 kilometers per hour. In the city, panic is spreading. The sound of the explosions is deafening. The sirens are blaring and the streetlights are out. Residents jolted awake come out of their houses to witness the assault. Metal debris falls into the streets. Several car accidents and injuries caused by panic are reported. Police forces stationed on the main roads urge civilians to take shelter in their homes with all lights off to hide from the enemy. Meanwhile, the mothership, constantly illuminated from the ground, moves slowly south and covers the roughly 40 kilometers between Santa Monica and Long Beach in 30 minutes. The gunners fire throughout the journey. 50 caliber tracer bullets anti-aircraft fire. The 3,000 soldier artillery brigade defends the city with Air Force support. Nearly 1,500 shells are fired, almost one per second. Direct hits are reported but do not seem to affect the targets. No visible damage or downed aircraft are observed. A resident would say the next day, it was like the 4th of July but much louder. They were shooting like crazy but they couldn't hit it. Then gradually, around 4 a.m., the shooting becomes sporadic and stops. The aircraft vanished as dawn broke on the horizon. At 7:21, the sirens sound for the last time. The alert is officially lifted, leaving the residents between the shock of the events they've experienced and the exhilaration of a victory won. As soon as dawn casts its silver rays through the veils of mist, it's time to assess the damage and search for explanations for what will now be known as the Battle of Los Angeles. The first battle fought and brilliantly won by the United States on their own soil against an adversary that has still not been formally identified to this day. Some tried to explain the event by suggesting weather balloons or airships that might have been caught in the searchlights. Balloons that withstand 30 minutes of shelling by 1,500 rounds explosive shells fired by dozens of anti-aircraft positions. If you really believe that, go check out my videos on the Hindenburg. You'll see just how sturdy those things are. A balloon? So those were planes? Well, not that either. Well, let's just say it's very unlikely. With all the metal flying around, it's hard to believe that in 30 minutes not a single aircraft was hit or crashed into the sea or the city. There was a rumor about an emergency landing at a Hollywood intersection, but no wreckage was ever found. Besides, this hypothesis doesn't fit with the very slow speed of the main craft or the other crafts seen around it. Yet, all the events I just described are the ones you find on sensationalist websites talking about that night. And of course, the massive UFO that flew over Los Angeles. And to illustrate this attack, everyone uses the same photo that was taken and featured on the front page of the Los Angeles Times the very next day. Alright, let's lay all this out. Imagine yourself on February 24, 1942 in Los Angeles. America just got hit hard by Pearl Harbor, and the day before, a Japanese submarine fired 25 shells at the harbor right near your home. Let's just say the level of relaxation is about the same as a metal concert fueled by Red Bull and cocaine. Just keep imagining. You're a soldier in charge of protecting the city and firing shells. For you, it's more than just a passion. Because being an artilleryman is definitely an art. For others, it might be painting, music, things like that, but for you, it's being an artilleryman. It's an art. That being said, is there a good and a bad artilleryman? Well, if we look at the bad artilleryman, well, he's the guy with an anti-aircraft battery. He sees something moving, he shoots, that's for sure. Then there's the good artilleryman. The good artilleryman is a guy, well, he has an anti-aircraft battery, he sees something moving and then he shoots. But it's not the same thing, you know. There's the good artilleryman and the bad artilleryman, that's it. Do you remember the first shots at 306? It was at a balloon carrying a red light. The soldiers identified it as a balloon before firing. Just a basic weather balloon released earlier. Did the soldiers think it was an enemy signal they wanted to eliminate? Well, in any case, they fired. After the first shot was fired, everyone else wanted to shoot too. Title: Afraid of Missing Something. Let me remind you of a technical detail. At the time, anti-aircraft fire consisted of explosive shells sent into the air that detonated with a delay. If you hit an enemy aircraft directly, that's ideal, but otherwise you saturate the area so the sky becomes a minefield for enemies. So, well, if your neighbor is firing, you fire too, even if you're not sure where. Things are blowing up everywhere. If the artillerymen are firing, there must be something out there. That night, everyone in Los Angeles believes they see Japanese planes in the sky. Except, and this is an important detail, no one actually sees anything. 4 times journalists traveled around the city during the battle to cover the event and gather eyewitness accounts. I'll give you a few. You'll have a better shot of consistency there than ever seeing part 3 of Fake Up. So, for the witnesses Ray Rezaman interviewed, the Long Beach police chief saw 9 silver planes. For police officers in front of Inglewood City Hall, 150 to 200 planes at an altitude of 7,000 to 9,000 meters. At the Inglewood police station, 7 planes, maybe 9. And civilians in the street saw aerial combat between enemy planes and American fighters. The journalist Marvin Miles, for his part, was told, "It's a whole squadron." No, it's a blimp. It must be because it's moving very slowly. It's probably coming from a secret airbase in southern Mexico. Bill Henry and Scripps Powers Hernapile from the Times report similar contradictory statements. But none of the 4 reporters actually saw a plane that night. And not a single newspaper headline the next day would describe an enemy aircraft, big or small. They talk about an explosion in the sky, damage on the ground and injuries, but nothing about any possible enemy aircraft. And as for civilian calls to the information center reporting aircraft, how should I put it? It's the same kind of testimony, incoherent testimony. People describe aircraft they can't even see. Let me explain. It's February, 2 in the morning. It's pitch dark. How can you expect to see planes with all their lights off at 9 kilometers altitude, or even at 2 kilometers? To give you an idea, the Japanese fighter had a wingspan of 11 meters. 11 meters. At 2 kilometers away, that's a ridiculously small angular size, which would have been seen on a pitch black night. Even during the day, a modern Cessna that's the same size is hard to see at that distance. Consider how often you've heard a small plane overhead or tried to spot it in the vast blue sky, struggling to find it. Alright, well now imagine the same thing at night, with all the lights off. And about the impact seen on that huge orange object over there. Well, it's just the shells exploding in the air like they're supposed to. The purpose of a shell isn't to destroy its target by hitting it directly, you know? Well, if that happens, it's a bonus. But hitting a moving object in the sky is tough. So the shells would explode, scattering enough shrapnel within a few dozen meters around to damage any aircraft nearby. And these explosions are orange in color. What a coincidence. All this brings us to the question from Darkalian from 78 who asks, anyway, there's the FBI photo in the newspapers of the UFO. You're just paid so we don't find out the truth. You're just the father, okay, of taste. But government. Yeah, no, my Maybach, he would actually ask, it's not even a question. The UFO from that night was photographed and appeared on the front page the next day. Just one single photo from 30 minutes of a UFO casually posing over the Bouche Noire, motionless before dozens of journalists. In the front row in one of the biggest American cities. We're going to take another look at this photo in a bit. The famous image where we're supposed to see a huge UFO above the city. Given the descriptions and the reported testimonies, didn't you have something more like Independence Day in mind? Or, like the 2011 movie A Massive Craft covering all of Los Angeles, an impressive UFO, right? Well, when I saw the photo, I was a bit disappointed. For this one, the photographer used a 4x5 press camera which was common in the 1940s and loaded it with black and white negative film. But since film at that time wasn't very sensitive to light, and a flash only had a range of a few meters, the original negative was underexposed, and the newspaper didn't want to publish a big black square to illustrate the biggest fireworks display of the time. So he took the negative and retouched it as was customary, enhancing the existing details and adding non-existent ones to make it more spectacular in the eyes of the readers. And so here is the negative from that time. And since it's a negative, if we invert the luminance to get the real image, we get this. It's quite far from the published image, isn't it? The original photo just shows 6 spotlights illuminating a few anti-aircraft explosions. There are no mysterious objects, no squadrons or strange birds, no UFOs or planes. As the Los Angeles Times later explained, and I quote, "The skyline was darkened with ink." Paint, similar to liquid corrector, had been used to brighten the searchlight beams and turn stray points of light into anti-aircraft bursts. The part of the image identified by ufologists as an extraterrestrial spacecraft was shaped by drops of paint on the print. And as a side note, the UFO theory only appeared in the early 1980s in Fate magazine. It wasn't mentioned then? Here's a discovery from this monthly magazine. I'll translate the headlines for non-English speakers. A sky full of UFOs, the scientific evidence of psychic healers, children's near-death experiences, hell. You can find copies on eBay if you feel like it. It was also in that same decade that the testimony of the famous Katie surfaced. She saw a huge object above the city, but we know nothing about her. And again, just one report of a huge object among 200,000 inhabitants. So no UFO, just a nice fireworks display, and that's the end of the story. Technically, yes. But the event still had some consequences. Starting with the damage from this non-battle, which left 5 dead. Not because of enemy bombs, since there was no bombing or enemies, but because of the darkness, collisions, and even heart attacks. Like Henry Ayers, 60 years old, who died at the wheel of his car loaded with ammunition he was taking to the National Guardsmen. Or George Vale, an air raid warning service agent who also passed away. Let's also remember that 1,500 explosive shells going off above a city means 9 tons of scrap metal falling back down. Not to mention the 50 caliber fire. And these aren't small pieces. We have a woman and her niece who narrowly escaped debris falling into their room, or shrapnel going through cars and ending up in a kitchen and a living room. Some shells don't explode in the air but detonate after landing, sometimes in the middle of residential areas. Sometimes they don't explode on the ground, forcing street closures to clear the area of unexploded shells. With bare hands, like here by Sergeant Weathers in Santa Monica. Luckily, Murphy's Law was on vacation that night. A lot of panic then, amplified by the flashes of explosions in the darkness of the streets. By the way, in case it needs to be said, the blackout over the city wasn't mysterious at all. It was ordered by the army, as was systematically done during air raids. It prevents enemy pilots from spotting their targets in the middle of a city with all the streetlights on. However, it only turns off the streetlights, not the homes or the shops. That makes people in the neighborhood nervous, since they don't like a lit-up shop window revealing their location. Nervous? Take Ben. He's mostly worried about an opportunistic burglary. And he'll end up at the police station. All good things must end, except sausage, which has 2. At 4:15, like a teen alone in his room, the army finally finishes emptying its magazines into the void. At dawn, the results are impressive. 1,440 shells fired, no planes shot down, but dozens of houses damaged. The soldiers reportedly made contact in the jungle before unloading 3 Gatling mags into the ferns, which wouldn't have hit a porcupine. It was only a shadow, nothing was there. Not a trace left behind. No blood. No deaths. They didn't hit anything. To finish on the civilian side, the event will have direct repercussions on the Japanese and Japanese-American population of the West Coast. On the night of the battle, the sheriff had bravely helped the FBI arrest several Japanese nurserymen and gardeners. They were allegedly caught red-handed signaling to the supposed enemy aviators. On a national scale, the hysteria of February 1942 had the effect of accelerating the implementation of Executive Order 9066 by President Franklin Roosevelt, signed just a few days earlier. The order authorized the incarceration and internment of 120,000 Americans of Japanese descent living on the West Coast. For what reason? Well, the answer is in the title. Because they are Japanese. or American citizens, but 2/3 of them are of Japanese origin. That being said, for several years now, Japanese people and foreigners in general were not welcome in the segregated United States. Now let's take a look at the army and the officials. We're watching a unique pilot tournament, ping pong mixed with a bad faith contest to decide who's to blame for this early 4th of July. The West Coast Defense Command claims not to know what the plane that triggered the alert was. If there even was a plane. Because let's remember, no one saw anything that could be confirmed or identified. General de DeWitt congratulates his troops for their vigilance. Yes, firing hundreds of shells without hitting anything is apparently a sign of military excellence, probably directly inspired by the ancient art of being idiots. Henry Stimson, Secretary of War, tries to save face with a vague speech mentioning 15 unidentified planes, possibly commercially purchased by enemy agents, to detect the location of anti-aircraft batteries. What? Evidence? Well, what for? This information was given to him by an outside report. Access that report? No, that's not possible because the dog ate it. Or maybe it fell behind Aunt Simon's living room dresser, but we promise as soon as we find it, we'll send it over. The Southern California congressman will then ask why the military didn't scramble aircraft if civilian or military planes were present. Because yes, contrary to what some witnesses said, no American planes took off that night. That's good, since flying into anti-aircraft fire would have been suicidal. Frank Knox, Secretary of the Navy, kept it simple. It was a false alarm. The gunfire was triggered by the soldiers' nervousness. That's it. Thank you. Goodbye. This, of course, sparked a backlash from Californians who didn't like being told they panicked for no reason. The Los Angeles Times responded directly in an editorial, "Nerves, Mr. Knox. Ours or the Army's?" Questioned again at the Capitol a little later, that same Mr. Knox said that his words had been misunderstood, that he was in charge of the Navy, and that air defense was the Army's job. Go ask them, and besides, leave me alone, I have to go swimming. A magnificent passing of the hot potato done with great finesse. So, to sum up, for the Army at first, there was nothing. And then some civilians say that yes, there were planes, so the Army changes its statements and splits the difference by announcing between 1 and 5 planes. Never formally seen, intercepted, identified, or hit in 30 minutes. Nevertheless, all official statements maintain that the soldiers did the right thing by shooting, that the city defended itself honorably, and that it's better to be too cautious than not cautious enough. After all, what can a little bird do? Anyway, it's 50 grams. So it's dangerous, you can't even imagine, you don't know what a little hen charges. Jokes aside, and this story is already quite something, a whole bunch of theories will pop up in the following days, strongly fueled by contradictory official statements. As for wild theories, let's mention secret aircraft tests, undercover agents, a secret Japanese base in Mexico, or a submarine acting as an aircraft carrier. Let's add a fake attack organized by the Army to increase its budget, testing the public's reaction to the arrival of extraterrestrials, or a Washington conspiracy to relocate certain Californian industries elsewhere in the country. And of course, weather balloons. When you can't explain something in the sky, just call it a weather balloon, right? But it's true that the balloon theory could explain the echo picked up earlier in the evening. You remember that on the radars of the time, which weren't really reliable, there was an engraved plate riveted onto them. Matt Winstock, a journalist in Los Angeles, was able to interview a gunner who served during that period. The simplest thing is to read you this excerpt. At the beginning of the war, the situation was quite worrying, and the Army was setting up coastal defenses. At one of the new radar stations near Santa Monica, the crew tried in vain to test the system by flying planes overhead. Since there were few aircraft available, they found a new method to test the radar. One of the men bought a bag of balloons, filled them with hydrogen, attached metal wires to them, and let them fly. Carried by the sea breeze, the balloons had the desired effect. They appeared on the screens, showing the equipment worked properly. But after traveling a good distance offshore and southward, the nighttime land breeze began to push the balloons back toward the coastal cities. The radars detected these metal wires showing on the screens as planes heading toward the city. At the end of the war, the Japanese would confirm that they never sent any planes into the skies over Los Angeles that night. No submarine nearby was carrying any aircraft. There was no UFO photographed either. And yet thousands of witnesses swear they saw something. So, collective hallucinations, atmospheric phenomenon, hysteria amplified by the spotlights and explosions. Even today, some people still think something was hidden from them. Others say they were the first UFOs of the modern era. In short, we went from a hunting party between Pittibon-sur-Saône and Corville to a pillar of UFO folklore. Which just goes to show, in confusion, everyone finds what they want. So, if you also want to observe the migration of the grey gallinules, just look up at the sky, be an astrono geek. And see you next time.